Hi, and welcome to Education Roundtable. This is Larry Petraccaro, and I have with me as my guest Frank Sanchez. Frank is the principal here at Columbia High School, which is where we're filming. And I want to talk to Frank a little bit about his background, what brought him into education, what brought him to South Orange Maplewood as principal of Columbia High School, and then maybe get into a little bit about the high school itself, not only the statistics and the, let's say, the material kinds of facts, but also maybe a little bit about the history, the creativity, and some of the students that have come through here to get a little bit of a handle on what Columbia High School means to Maplewood and South Orange. So, Frank, thank you. First of all, thank you for joining us. And let me start with the first question that I think we talked about, and that is a little background on yourself. What got you interested in education? What brought you into that field? And then what you've done before and what brought you here?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Larry.
You're welcome.
So this is my 25th year in education and my first time ever being interviewed, so that must mean something. So I started 25 years ago at the Springfield School District, not very far from here. And I was a social studies teacher at middle school, a history teacher. When I was at college, I always loved history, and I thought I wanted to be a historian and do a lot of research. My father and mom always told me to have a backup plan just in case, and they said, you should also look into teaching, right? And so as part of the college program, we had to do internships at certain schools, and I loved doing the internship at the high school because you get to lecture and pontificate like our history teachers did, at least when I was in college, right? And then I got stuck at a middle school in fifth grade, and I was like, how can I teach them, with all the great stuff about history? And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the kids more than the subject, and so I knew that teaching was what I wanted to do. And so I started teaching late 90s in Springfield School District. I spent a good almost 9 years there, and just loving being in the classroom, but then I also had the opportunity to be a social studies supervisor. I spent the last 12 years in Mountain Lake School District, where I was a director of curriculum, I guess in central office. But I really wanted, when you're doing that, I was great. I created some programs, entrepreneurial program, we did a biotech program, and got to work with great teachers. But you kind of miss being with students. And when there was an opportunity to be a building principal, I took that and really felt that love again, being with students all the time, like throughout the entire day. When we're still meeting with teachers and you're still meeting with parents, but at the end of the day, it's always focused on the student. And so I've been here, been lucky to be at Columbia for the past 2 years. This is my second year. Mm-hmm. First year, obviously, with the pandemic. So this is like we say it's my first year in real time, seeing what it's like. And we're, I knew about Columbia. So when I was looking for an opportunity for a much bigger school, Columbia has 2,000 students, I was a little intimidated because when I was in Springfield, I knew about the great tradition of Columbia High School. And it was a long process it's almost like a campaign to the interview process. But I met some great people, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me. And so I'm so happy to be here now.
Well, great, and I'm sure we're glad to have you as well. When you mentioned that you had been a teacher, one of the things I've often wondered is the transition from a teacher to a principal. Does that carry baggage, or is it too easy to emphasize with teachers as a teacher as opposed to managing teachers as a principal, or did you find there were no real problems for you when you made that transition, which obviously took place over a number of years? So.
Well, it's interesting because in both places that I made that transition, I was a teacher first, and so you're working with colleagues, and then you become the boss.
You're right.
So that was a real challenge. Especially in Springfield, where I was little Frankie Sanchez, and next thing you know, as a supervisor, I had to manage a team. But I think it's not the biggest challenge because at the end of the day, we have great educators and great teachers. We're all going for the same thing, right? Is to help students. And so when I came here, I felt almost excited, like, oh, these are people who I don't know yet, right? And so there's that trepidation, but I thought as a management area, it was going to be easier, right? For that reason. I tell you, I haven't had any struggles though with this because we have a really great staff. And I say that not just because, they're here and I'm here, but I can tell you, I've been in many schools, I've been in several school districts, and this staff is top notch intellectually. Many love the subject and can go with anyone, toe to toe with content. But we also have, many great faculty members who are flexible and caring and so passionate. And that's a lot, right? You need all of those things to be a successful teacher. And, when you talk, this last year we had contract issues between the Board of Education and the Teacher Association. And you heard students really discussing how much they love their teachers, how much they care about their teachers because their teachers care about them. So for me as a management issue, it's not, it's pretty great when you have a bunch of all-stars, right? It's pretty easy to coach, I think, at that point, right?
And I guess using that analogy, and you're right, though. It's at least from my experience, I was never a teacher or anything, but when you have enthusiasm and passion for something, it just makes it better. And not only does it make it better for you in terms of, in my opinion, what you're trying to do, but the outcome is always better. I think the outcome is always better. And
the buy-in from our students. We have, students who really want to learn. And obviously, though, some students want to learn as almost like a transactional, right? Because they're thinking about college, right? I want the best grade so I can go to college. But when they see their teachers working hard and being passionate, then it's contagious.
Well, I will say I have interviewed some of the students a couple of years ago, and more than once. And I will say without question that every time I've interacted with the students here from Columbia High School, I've been always impressed with their intelligence, with their knowledge, with their compassion, or with their passion for things. They're an impressive bunch. At least all the ones that I've come into contact with. We talked about things like race issues and things of that nature, and they're very perceptive. So I agree with you about the students, and I'll agree with you about the teachers. So you mentioned the staff. Maybe one of the things you could give us a little bit of a background on is the way the school is organized, and some of the statistics. I mean, how many teachers, how many students, how many departments, that kind of thing.
Sure. So we have 2,000 students, a little bit less. It's like 1990-ish. And from what I understand, that's where, the usual numbers have been in the past 5 years, or past 5 or 6 years. Numbers have gone up and down a little bit here and there. We are getting a referendum that has just been, it was passed a few years ago, and we will be adding to the high school, and we can talk about that a little later, but they'll be adding 7 new classrooms, right? So the idea is that Columbia is getting bigger. Columbia is divided, if you will. I'm the principal of the high school, and we have 4 grade level administrators. So there's a vice principal. What I think is a great idea, the vice principal, in some schools you have a vice principal for testing and a vice principal for discipline, and what we do is the vice principal follows a grade. So we have 4 vice principals, one for ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th, and 12th, and they follow the class of 2022, 2023. So it's really great because they get to know the students, year after year. In addition to my 4 vice principals, we have a director of guidance. Our counseling director, Ms. Ballasone, oversees 10 guidance counselors, and we were very fortunate. 2 years ago, the Board of Education supported a new social worker for our regular education students, which we never had before, with the idea that coming back out of COVID, some of our students would need that extra social and emotional support. And what that does is this value-added element that the social worker can get interns. So now we have 8 additional people to come and support our most fragile students or our most at-risk students. After that, so we have those counselors there. We have about 200 staff and faculty, about 150 faculty members. And they're divided into departments, whether it's social studies, language, English language arts, and STEM, and so on, right? So our students get to, I think one of the coolest things, and I will say, one of the most impressive things about Columbia High School is our program of studies. And so when I was interviewing, the program of studies is what classes we offer. Okay. It blew my mind, the types of classes, and you can find out on the counseling website at the high school. So in most typical high schools, you can get Art 1, Art 2, right? Here we have art, drawing, sculpture, we have fibers. That's not something that you see until college, right? We have, and the same thing could go with dance. We have the oldest dance company in high schools in New Jersey, really? Right? Yeah, so it's been here for, this is our 51st year of the Special Dance Company. And again, not something you would see at many high schools. You can go to the literature department. You could take, of course, American Lit, like we did probably, World Lit, but you can also take Lit of gender and identity. You can take sports and literature junior year. You can take, of course, AP language, AP literature, but you could take the literature of the African diaspora. Something, again, you probably wouldn't see until way late into your undergraduate experience at a college. And we have teachers who do it here. So I think that's one of the great things for our upperclassmen, our juniors and seniors, to take such a variety of classes. We're in a TV studio, right? Yeah. That's something that is not as rare, but we have different levels of that here. So we started typical. Some high schools have AP computer science, right? So we offer, of course, the introduction to that. We offer 2 AP computer science classes, but now we're adding cybersecurity. So we do have such an incredible variety of classes that you can't find in smaller high schools. Mm-hmm. And then to boot, I think which is really neat, you have a community that's so supportive that can do master classes, right? So people who are work in marketing for Fortune 100 companies, musicians on Broadway who live here and then come in and just volunteer to be, I sing on Broadway, and I'm going to come to the vocal class today, and really it's an incredible opportunity that is so unique here at Columbia, and we call those master classes. Okay. And we have those in so many of our fields.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. So it sounds like it's a way to really get community engagement and involvement, and that's I know there are the towns themselves, Maplewood and South Orange, have an awful lot of talented people.
Yes,
I know that. I also know that we're going to have to take a break.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure.
Well, shouldn't be sorry. It's a good thing I was paying attention because this is kind of an interesting conversation. So if you'll stay with us, we'll be back in about a minute, and I'll continue our conversation with Frank Sanchez.
Dad, we need to talk. If you're not going to listen to me, who will you listen to?
Jeffrey!
Is that Marcia Gay Harden?
I think so.
You're getting older.
Not that old.
Your brain is changing.
That's what I was saying.
Honey, I've got experience with this. Jeffrey, brain health is all about making the most of your brain as you age.
Really?
Oh, where did she go?
Learn what you can do to help keep your brain healthy at brainhealth.gov.
Yeah, hi, and welcome back to Education Roundtable. This is Larry Petraccaro with Frank Sanchez. Frank is the principal here at Columbia High School. And just before the break, we were talking about the number of classes that we have here. We were talking about master classes, which is something that I was totally unaware of, where members of the Maplewood South Orange community who have talent in a variety of areas, apparently, whether it's the arts or science or management, offer to come in and share some of that perspective or knowledge. So the
Can I just add one
Yeah,
before
no,
we interrupt?
please,
It's just,
please.
it's just a perfect example. I love walking around and seeing all the great things that are happening during the day, but after school as well. And so I'm walking down the hall, we pop into the horticulture club, and one of our graduates from 2009 has joined up with Miss Biasucci, our teacher, and has really talked about the beauty and the need for more gardens in front of our school, rain gardens, right? Because we do see some runoff. It's very interesting. I don't know if you noticed this, but Columbia High School, as we have grown from the original 1926 building, it's if you go through the main entrance, that's right on Parker. That's the first floor. However, due to the elevation, when they built the B wing, right, which is where the library is, and it comes out to Academy Street, that's the second floor, right? And then the D wing, which is where the cafeteria and the Black Box Theater, which is right on the corner of Valley, that's in the basement level. So if you think about it, it has this kind of slope, and so rainwater comes down. So here we have a resident who has joined, and a Columbia graduate, who is joining with Miss Biasucci, working with the club, the horticulture club, and she's donating plants. And next month, with board approval, we're going to have a brand new rain garden outside in the front, right, of the library, the B wing. And that's, again, someone who lives in town, is passionate about indigenous plants, and really teaching our students about what plants bloom in the fall versus the spring, and then in the summer, so it has perpetual blooming through those 3 seasons. And we're that would be a cost that a regular high school couldn't afford, to have a consultant like that. But someone who volunteers their time, it's awesome for us.
It's great to have that community involvement. But when we were talking about all these different electives, and there's apparently so many, how 2 questions. Does that kind of variety cause any kind of problem with the basic education, assuming there is such a thing these days as basic education, and how do you decide how and what electives you're going to offer?
So that's a great question, because our students have to take certain requirements for the state. So for example, they have to take literature 4 years, right? So they have the opportunity to choose the type of literature classes that we get to have. But it would be great to have 8 periods. That's what we used to offer here at Columbia, right? 8 periods, including a lunch. Because they could be longer periods. You can go more in depth in your conversations and your critical thinking and classroom interaction. However, our students really wanted more classes. So we are now at 9 periods, including a lunch. About 2/3 of our students don't take that last period. They'll meet with teachers, and it's called a conference period, and they'll get extra help. But many of our students will use that period to take PE, so they can fit another elective, right? And so I want students to find their passion and be able to take as many courses as they can without, and this is really serious now in these last maybe 10, 15 years we have seen in education, as students are trying to get into the most competitive or selective colleges, they find that they need to take 5 advanced placement courses a year, 4 or 6 maybe. And are students taking those courses because they have a passion for that, or is it because they feel they need to get into the college they want to get into? It's something that we work with students about, and our counselors talk to the students about setting a healthy schedule for them. So yes, students can take, as they have 8 periods to take, and they have a great variety. It doesn't impact them intellectually to have so many choices, but we do worry that sometimes our students might not be as balanced as we want them to be. So we've made some additions to the schedule or programming, especially after COVID. We brought in more interns, as we mentioned. We also added something maybe controversial in some schools, but if a student is playing a sport during that marking period, they basically have met the physical education standards, right? So we'll allow that to count for PE class. And so then instead of going into PE class, we'll give that student a period of study hall to catch up on homework. Not to take another class, right? But to kind of take a break. Because many of our students have a really stressful schedule. And I think it's a little different than it may have been 10, 15 years ago, with the students really feeling that stress. And it's interesting, we give our students so much more data now than we did when I first started in education. We'll give our students access to something online, and there'll be a scattergram of the last 10 years of Columbia high school students, their SAT, what college they went to, their GPA. And sometimes I think when we talk to our students, all of that information, that data, makes them more stressed, right? I think we're thinking we're doing a great job, right? Like, here, now you know where you can go, what's realistic. But then they see that sometimes the feedback some of our students have given us is that they feel anxious and nervous about it. So it's that fine balance that has been, after COVID, has been really challenging, I think, for all educators to find the rigor that we want to return to, but understanding that they've experienced a real traumatic experience with being online and not having that kind of support that they were used to, and then just starting again like everything's normal, right? So,
well, you used an interesting word, data, because I think in general that's a problem that all of us have. It's not necessarily useful, and it can't necessarily be transformed into information, and it can't necessarily use that information to a decent effect. It's just, like you said, data. It's just data. Well, you mentioned COVID, the adaptations that you've had to make. I mean, obviously, it sounds like one of the adaptations you've had to make since you've come back is the general mental health and so forth of the students, their balance, if you will. Were there any adaptations you had to make during that year of basically virtual education that you found useful and were able to continue, or did you find some things that you'd never want to do again if you had to go through it again?
Well, I think this the ability with technology. I mean, we threw the teachers such a curveball that first day back, and it's understandable. I think they understood why. We didn't have a learning management system, so in other words, teachers, if they had their own website, they did that on the side. But students would come into their class and they would give out handouts, right? And they would say, this is what's for homework. What we did was we brought in a company that most colleges use around the state and around the country to kind of have like a virtual platform. So teachers can present their classes there. They can also post their assignments. They can identify when the assignments are due, which would then all sync into a calendar for the students.
Okay.
And we've kept that, right? That because it's a great learning tool and a learning management program. So we definitely kept that. But what we definitely saw were students who, didn't have fast internet at home, perhaps didn't have internet at all. And so, yes, the town and the community and our schools, right, we got together and provided hotspots for many of our students. But we really learned that without the structure of school, even though we also gave out free lunch every day, if students weren't in the vicinity, then they didn't take advantage of that. And I could understand the walking in the rain or the long distance and going to classes. So I think it gave us as educators a better understanding of the different socioeconomic issues in our community. And I think it gave us a better understanding to empathy for those students. But we also need to understand that it just didn't end. The pandemic, didn't end last year, and things are normal this year, right? So for many of our students who had a really tough year last year, we have to ensure that if there are any gaps, how to tackle that and get our students back on grade level.
We only have about 3 minutes left
Sure.
or so, but do you mentioned how to tackle those gaps and how to get them back on grade level. What are some of the things that you have found effective, or are you still struggling with institution, I mean, how to do that. I guess there's no, okay, here's the button we push and everything is fine kind of thing, right?
Well, last year it was a challenge regarding just something as easy as one would think. How long should the school day be, right?
Okay.
Well, school day is 8 to 3, right? But I don't think we had the capacity to have a full school day emotionally in front of a TV screen, our students and our teachers and our administrators, right? So we decided to do a half day, as many school districts did, but not all school districts. Some did the full day. That meant we had to then think about, what are we going to teach? Because we're going to have longer classes, so we can go more in depth, but they're going to be meeting every other day. So there are going to be holes. So we had to really have just a conversation about curriculum first. What are the power standards, if you will? Like, what are the things that we know we need to have? Because if this student is going to finish Algebra 2, how can they be successful then next year in pre-calculus? And we think we did a good job on that. We know we did because we looked at what percentage of tests where we were at the end of last year, what content was delivered at the finals, and then in the finals the year before. What we're now looking at is, how did the students get that information? It's one thing to teach it, but did the students learn that information? So what we've been doing is many more diagnostic tests throughout this year. The state has provided some, one called Start Strong, but we have the Renaissance test that we give our English and math students. And then we look at that data to see where the students are this year as compared to years before. And so that's what these are the conversations we're having now to make sure that our students specific students, where are they struggling and with what specific topics?
And in general, did you find, in general, it's always a vague sort of term, but that it worked fairly well during COVID, the virtual learning?
Well, it's interesting. We had some students who maybe struggled before COVID, and then we're like, this is great because I'm an independent thinker and I'm an independent, I could work on my own schedule. And they blossomed. But we had more students that struggled because of COVID than that. We had students who just couldn't get up without that structure, or got up at period 1 and then didn't do that. But some students also had to take care of their siblings, right, if both parents were working. And that's a burden that they wouldn't have if they were in the building, right? So unfortunately, we did have students that absences were much great during COVID than
COVID.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't get to a number of things as I'd hoped to talk to you about, but you touched on a lot of things, Frank, and I really appreciate that. And it looks like we're just about out of time. We'll have to, some of the things you mentioned, like in the last 10, 15, 20 years, you're doing things differently. It would be wonderful to like to have a conversation about how things have changed. It's more complex, but I think it's telling me we have to stop. So thank you for joining us on Education Roundtable. It's Larry Petraccaro with Frank Sanchez, and we hope to do it again sometime. Absolutely. Once we have our blueprints done with the referendum, I'll come back and walk you through what Columbia looked like and when it was in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and what it will look like in 2 years. Thank you. And thank you for joining us.